Thanks for clicking on the video. And here on our Mimic, we are celebrating Halloween season, and we're going to use Dragon Magazine issue number 138. This was published in October of 1988, so the height of my nerdy days back in high school. And I'm happy to break down a very interesting article within this magazine. So it says Halloween greetings from the Undead, and that gives you a clue of what article we're going to talk about. So let me get this magazine out of the protective bag and board. And you can appreciate the cover here, having wonderful artwork of a skeleton as depicted by the brush of Jeff Easley. You can see his signature right here, right there. For the spooky month of October, our free giveaway this month is for a sealed copy of The Hunger, a board game by Richard Garfield, where you play a vampire. How cool is that? So I'll put a link down below on how you could win this prize. If you're watching this from the future, sorry you missed out. You could click our main channel page to see our current giveaway, as we have one going on every month. Dragon Magazine typically does have a Halloween issue as well as a April's Fool issue every year. But we're gonna talk about this one specifically today for this season. So the article, somewhere on page 22, I believe. Yep, right here. The Grateful Undead. So this wonderful article is written by Tom Moldvay, and he is one of the editors at TSR, and he did a wonderful article here that lays out some groundwork for new variants of skeletons, ghouls, and zombies. And with each one, he gives a little backstory of how they came to be, typically from a literary source, but yeah, one of them is actually from a Disney cartoon source. So let me give you a little flip through of this article. It's quite lengthy, and we'll break it down in a bit. I'm just gonna give you a sense that it is a pretty lengthy article, not just a single page of stats or something like that. All right, so let's go back to the beginning here, page 22, and the Ungrateful Dead, expanding the ranks of the ghastly host. So it starts off the article with a pretty lengthy description, what characterizes a monster as being undead. And of course, one of the characteristics is they have to be dead. It says it right here. By all rights, such creatures should be dead. Number 2, most such creatures have some sort of physical form. And number 3, most such creatures are hopelessly evil and attack living beings on sight. Then it moves on to the skeletons, and it describes skeletons as, typically dried up bones that are coming from graveyard and that pop up and, of course, attack your player characters. So the first variant he talks about is the Bloody Bones version, where the skeleton is more fresh. Maybe the corpse hasn't decomposed completely, and so there is still some blood present. So this is the Bloody Bones variant. Certainly, you might have seen some sort of variation in modern horror movies, but they also talk about some of the origins here of the Bloody Bones, as it was from traditional English folklore here, and they mentioned it even in a 17th century dictionary, describing the creature as a name of a specter mentioned to frighten children, and its full name was Raw Head and Bloody Bones. So that is the origin for this particular variation of skeleton. The next skeleton variant that we have here are skeletons that are very well adept at combat, as they are the skeletons of fallen soldiers. And so he draws inspiration for this variation from the old Jason and Argonauts and Sinbad movies, which I definitely saw as a kid. I was very struck by all that stop motion animation with the skeletons, bringing them to life, holding swords and shields. And so that's what he is drawing inspiration from. And here are the stats for that skeleton. The third skeleton type is the most interesting one to me, and this is the dry bones variation. So he drew inspiration for this particular skeleton from the old classic Walt Disney cartoon with the dancing bones. You might have seen that as a kid, where you see skeletons and they're dancing, passing their skulls one to another, and their legs move around and swap places and have a nice jig. So he states this dry bones skeleton is going to be hard to defeat, because the only way to destroy the skeleton is to pulverize the bones, because even if you say decapitate the skeleton or chop off the arm, the bones will magically reattach themselves just like they do in the cartoon. So the only way to get rid of this variant is to actually crush the bones into pulp, the bones into dust. So I really do enjoy this particular variation, and you might want to do that and throw it into your campaign one day. Obviously, these stats are for first edition AD&D, but you could, of course, modify it for 5th edition or the current 2024 edition. All right, so we'll flip the page here. The next variation of skeleton we have are gem eyes. And you might have seen these kind of skeletons before where, in the dark, you might see some glowing eyes, and then it turns out to be a skeleton. But of course, skeletons won't have eyes. So he sort of incorporates this idea by giving them eyes with gems. And with each particular gem, he assigns a particular special ability. For example, ruby eyes here have burning eye spell, sapphire, they grant luck to their animator. Diamond eyes have the power to double their movements and attacks, casting a haste basically. Amethyst eyes gives the ability to cast illusions. Opal eyes can appear to duplicate themselves. Pearl eyes cause the opponents to fall asleep, casting a sleep spell. Obsidian eyes radiate darkness. Emerald eyes weaken opponents, etc. So these are very cool abilities that the skeleton is able to have. And it's probably my second favorite creature in this entire article, right after dry bones. The next skeleton we have is shock bones. And you might have seen variations of this in movies where there's like electricity being passed and to bring creatures to life, sort of Frankenstein style. And so that is inspiration for shock bones, basically a skeleton with electrical powers. The last skeleton we have is the picture here, the galley beggar. And this galley beggar, he was first mentioned in a book called Discovery of Witchcraft back in 1584. And so it's describing this galley beggar as a very thin spirit, often looking like a skeleton. So it has more properties, sort of like a ghost or a phantom, and that's actually what you're supposed to use for the stats of this creature, as it mentions that you should just copy the same stats that are in Monster Manual number 2. But it is not a ghost per se, or at least not a ghost as it is depicted in the Monster Manual, as it's more considered a phantom. All right, so the next category of undead that this article goes over is zombies, and it gives a pretty lengthy history of the origin of the zombie from its voodoo source and how the dead are raised this way. And it gives a very lengthy description about the origin historically of zombies from the Native American and voodoo culture, how people are sort of in a way like brainwashed and act as zombies, but also how it eventually became raising the undead. So we're going to flip the page here, and I'm sure you could find a PDF of this article, as there are multiple copies of Dragon Magazine PDF online if you just search for it. The article continues its history lesson here with the Haitian culture contribution to the mythos of zombies. And we get our first variation type, the Walking Dead. So this type here is basically more of a fresh corpse. So the zombie itself is stronger with more intact muscles and abilities rather than a rotting corpse. So that is inspiration for this variation of zombie. The next zombie type we have here is the Hungry Dead, and this is inspired by the Night of the Living Dead zombies, where they are really, really hungry and really come at you. And the only way to get rid of these zombies is a shot to the head or the head to be destroyed. And so if you damage the other areas, it will be immune to all the other different physical attacks except to that head, which contains the magical force that is animating them. So that is inspiration for this variation. The next type is actually up here, the Lesser Colossus and Greater Colossus. And so he talks about a story here written in 1934. And this has in Weird Tales a large zombie that is a sort of like a golem of many different body parts combined together to make this gigantic zombie type creature. This article gives a very interesting trivia that this story helped inspire one section of the X2 Dragon Amber module, where there is a section that is sort of matching the structure and castle that is mentioned in this story. And apparently they were given permission to do so by the author's estate. So pretty cool little trivia bit there. So the next zombie type is the Grand Zombie. This zombie is more like a lich and is able to cast spells. So pretty deadly variation type, special attack spells, it says right here. And you can see more of the stats on the side, as well what spells he might have access to. Now we're going to move on to our third and last type of undead in this article, and that is of the ghouls. And he gives a very detailed history of the origin of the term ghouls and how they were inspired from Arabian stories. And typically ghouls could be of either sex, but typically in Arabian stories they were more female, as they were considered to be beautiful but deadly, and sometimes could even foster children here. So very interesting variations of ghouls. So very interesting origin of the ghouls that D&D drew inspiration from. And a lot of these stories are, of course, from the 1001 Nights or the Arabian Night stories. So our very first variation of the ghoul is the ghoulah. And this is inspired by one of the stories. This one man that meets a girl, and after a brief courtship, they get married. And basically, she sort of disappears every night. And eventually, the husband follows her and finds her going to a cave, and there's a couple of ghouls there consuming a fresh kill, and she joins them and discovers that she's actually a ghoul herself. When he confronts her, she drops her polymorph self spell and attacks in her monstrous form. And so that is inspiration for this type of ghoul here. Next type of ghoul we have is the baka, and this is drawing inspiration from the Haitian variation, which is almost like a zombie, but there's some important differences it says here. That forms a baka belong to a member of a secret magical society that practices ritual cannibalism. And so this evil variation has some access to spells, and you can see that written down here. We'll flip to the next page here. And they are, of course, cannibalistic, which would be horrifying to meet. The next variation here is going to be the Greek variation of ghouls. And apparently there are stories of female demons that steals and devours young children. And so that is going to be their main difference. And they have a special attack of energy drain, basically sucking life from people to maintain a youthful appearance. This reverse aging is something of illusion and is not necessarily permanent. If the victim dies from the attack, then the corpse will be that of a young child. If the victim can be freed before death from energy draining, he will immediately return back to his normal age. So yeah, these guys will suck and life steal from you. The next variation of ghoul we have is the spirit ghoul, and here's a picture of that variation. And The author draws inspiration from a book by Elliot O'Donnell called The Werewolves, and this was published in 1914. And in this particular story that they reference here, this ghoul is actually a human victim that has been possessed by demonic entities, and so has special attacks of paralyzation here, and of course is chaotic evil. It mentions here that unlike normal ghouls, a spirit ghoul is not necessarily doomed to be a ghoul forever. In fact, if a spirit ghoul is knocked unconscious but not killed, it can be bound so that the demon can later be exorcised. A character killed by a spirit ghoul does not risk becoming a ghoul, as he is, once again, not a ghoul per se, but a possessed character. The next ghoul type we have is the Black Enis. It's drawn inspiration from Old English folklore and culture. And apparently they believed it to be a hag of some sort. And they would actually try to bait out this creature by dragging a dead animal, typically a dead cat, and bring it and drag it across the woods. The name comes from having the cat being scented with some anise seed. So that's how it got its name. Very interesting history there. And here is the stat block for that hag-like ghoul and her cat. The next ghoul type we have is the Wendigo, and it talks here about its Native American origins and how some of the inspiration is also drawn from some Cthulhu mythos later on. This creature has a special ability to summon additional ghouls, as well as gas and windwalkers here. And anyone looking at the Wendigo must make a save versus spells or be affected by fear. The next variation ghoul we have is from Greek mythology, the Kalikanzari. And there are multiple forms of this. In fact, let me just show you on the back here the stats of it. And here is a depiction of it. It is a small, tight creature, and it's not necessarily cannibalistic, and probably represent more like evil imps or fairies, and that's how it is described here in this article. And it says here, despite their shapes, the monsters delight in dancing, and they like to play tricks. Fortunately, they are stupid and gullible and quite quarrelsome. Okay, let's flip to the next page. And I believe this is the end of the article with that symbol there. Yeah. Oh, I don't ever seen this before. The Bullwinkle and Rocky role-playing game by TSR. I actually do have a copy of this in the library, and maybe one day we'll go over this. It is a very interesting product. All right, but let's go back here. Author has given a stat difference to the larger variation of this creature, who has the power of confusion and is able to use this spell 3 times a day. However, clerics and paladins are immune to the confusion, and these larger variations are still stupid and easily tricked. And that's it. So this was very, very cool to read and peruse, as I have forgotten about this article, especially about the history in the background. Maybe as a kid, I didn't appreciate it back then. I just enjoyed it more for the stats. If you have time to find the PDF of this article, or even just pause the video as I was flipping through the pages and read the history in depth, it is a very intriguing article that really gives you a background, almost like a mega bonus article of ecology that Dragon Magazine typically has describing a monster type. Most of the articles you see for creatures nowadays talk about maybe their origin or source within D&D lore, but I just love this article for describing the inspiration for all these creatures, how as it relates to our real life cultures and our fears, and how it inspires us to come up with these awesome creatures. So thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you found this interesting. And if you do, hopefully you could hit that like and subscribe. It certainly helps us out on the channel. So thanks for listening to that. As always, keep on adventuring out there.